All right, let's get started, Curtis. So, a little background. Curtis is a PhD geo. I definitely want to get a little bit into your background, but first I'll do a little introduction. So, I was introduced to Curtis late 2023 by a couple of friends, and I learned about Scout Discoveries, the company he's CEO of that is a private company right now. My family is actually a shareholder in Scout, and they look to go public in 2025. So I wanna dig into the Scout story and learn more about what the company's been doing. But so Curtis, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into the mining industry.
Yeah, sure. Well, thanks for hosting this. This is actually the first sort of public interview on Scout, so it's kind of exciting to get to talk about it. Yeah, you mentioned I'm a geo by trade. I've spent my entire life in the Northwest U.S., born and raised in this area. I did my undergraduate in Idaho. That's how I got into this state and really started getting interested in the geology and exploration mining history here. I would have been sort of 2009 era. I started my career working with Newmont Mining in Nevada, mostly sort of operations, underground mining, ore control, things like that. Worked some open pit on the copper gold side as well. And that's what I ended up parlaying into, a couple graduate school stints, the last being the PhD, really looking at porphyry skarn systems and how they relate to Carlins and sort of a long story there. But, around the same time, I was living in Winnemucca, Nevada. And so, I think a mutual friend of ours, Chad Peters, who's also listening here, we were neighbors in Winnemucca. That's how I got to know him. He was working for Premier Gold Mines. I was working for Newmont. We both were really interested in starting our own company. And when he got Ridgeline off the ground, this would have been early 2018, 2017. I was trying to get the first Scout off the ground, which was called Scout Minerals at the time. And the idea was, pretty simple. Nevada geology continues north into Idaho. Geology doesn't care about state borders. And BC geology continues south into Idaho as well. So there's sort of this meeting ground of very prospective mineral belts. And at the time, 2017, 18, there wasn't a lot going on in Idaho. I'd done some work there, spent quite a bit of time looking at the rocks, really looking at some of the historic mining districts, and there was a really clear opportunity to come in and do grassroots work there. And there was nobody doing it. This was before Integra Resources, before Liberty Gold or Pilot Gold at the time. There really wasn't a lot going on in the state. It was really off the radar, and there's reasons for that. Maybe we can talk about later. But yeah, I tried to get the first company off the ground, which was called Scout Minerals. It didn't work because a number of reasons in hindsight. Mostly, I was a geo and did not have many connections on the capital markets side. So it was pretty tough to pull together some seed funding as well. It was a very different story than now. It was early stage. Hey, we've got some ideas. Let's go stake some ground. That's actually not that appealing from an investing standpoint. Really what you want is the torque of drilling and kind of the discovery phase. So it was a good hard lesson for me. But at the, sort of during that time, I got introduced to Dave Cole at EMX Royalty. And so initially pitched him for money. He said, why don't you come do this for us? We do grassroots work. And if we have any luck finding something, maybe you can spin it off into a company. And so that's really what happened. So in 2018, I moved up to Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, which is where I live now and where we're based. Sort of a good hub, big mining hub in the state, as well as just a good hub to operate out of. And yeah, we just started looking at rocks and seeing what we could find. We ended up having quite a lot of success pulling together about 16 different projects across the state. Sort of a lot of details around all that. Did a lot of option deals with different juniors, some mid tiers. The Idaho started to get a lot of traction around 2020, 2021 on the gold side as well. And then come 2022, market got pretty tough. We had a bunch of projects come back, and then it was pretty clear that it was time to spin off the company. And so that's what became Scout Discoveries, which is technically a spinoff from EMX Royalty. We took our business unit, our portfolio. We own a drill rig as well, and we spun that out into a new company. So that's sort of the short history of how it all got to where it is today.
So, okay, it's a spin out from the royalty company based in Denver. And so that's how you were able to assemble such an impressive set of projects. I mean, I'm not sure many people know, but Scout has 16 projects in Idaho, and three of them already at the, resource stage, four are drill ready. That's
Mhm.
that's pretty impressive.
Yeah, that's exactly how it happened. Had we been funding this, on our own from the beginning, we wouldn't have been able to do it at that scale. And I actually think that's the way you have to do it. Like I would say really our focus is looking for tier one systems. So that is my main bias. I was sort of molded by Newmont early on, like looking for big things. And I actually think that's the right way to approach Idaho in general. From a socioeconomic standpoint, these small towns in Idaho, what you want are long-lived mining operations. You don't want 5 to 7, year heap leach type things. So we've sort of gone at it with that approach. And the challenge with that approach is it's pretty capital intensive, especially in the US. Claims are expensive. And, so you need to have, good funding to do that. And in 2017, 18, the opportunity in Idaho was to stake big land positions. You could come in. I mean, we staked a 250,000 ounce gold resource at 2 grams at surface that was open. That you move that to Nevada, that's never been dropped, since it was discovered in the 80s. And so it was this unique time. And we came in, we staked. Scout is by far the largest mineral rights holder in the state of Idaho at this point. We staked 60,000 acres of mineral rights, all sort of our team. In Idaho, it's 4 by 4 inch by 4 foot posts. So a lot of posts on the back, getting that done. But yeah, it was
That's
a unique
wild. You
opportunity.
stake 60,000 acres just with your team?
Yeah, it was amazing. Yeah, we
Jesus.
had we had some pretty tough summers. I'll tell you that. It's
So that's
hardcore.
6 years of blood, sweat, and tears there.
Yeah, exactly. So we spent, between EMX, and then our option partners, we spent about $5 million building the portfolio to where it's at now. Really a drill ready stage. A lot of basic work, geologic mapping, sampling, geophysics across the board, some select drilling, and it was just really teed up. It was actually a beautiful setup to spin off a company. So we were fortunate that things worked out that way. But it really was 6 years of incredibly hard work. We had starting off, it was just me in the garage up here in Coeur D'Alene. But by 2022, we had about 12 people full time. In the summers, doing a ton of work. And so yeah, it was. Right now, I'd say, anyone involved in Scout gets to benefit from all of that work that we did over the last 6 years. So.
That's fantastic. That's a great story. So let's dig in there a little bit. So go back to 2018. I remember 2018. 2018 was an awful year in the junior mining sector. It was one of the worst years I've ever seen in my life. That was the year that gold hit 1167 in August, and everybody packed up shop. No junior could raise money. So that's when basically Scout started. That's how you were able to get all this good ground in Idaho. So let's talk about Idaho. And that's really how money and value is made in the junior mining sector. The projects are acquired during bear markets for pennies on the dollar or for nothing, and then they're worked over time, and then they're sprung out to the public market during bull markets when people actually care about things, and capital can be raised to drill. So let's talk about Idaho.
Mhm.
So the state of Idaho has a long mining history, storied mining history, going back to like the 1850s, like basically the westward expansion. A lot of silver was found in Idaho. A lot of placer gold was mined in Idaho.
Mhm.
But the state kind of went into a dormancy during the 90s and 2000s. Can you talk a little bit about that and sort of why the state of Idaho went into this mining downturn for like 30, 40 years?
Yeah, it's a great question. That is actually the key question, why there was this opportunity. And you're exactly right. The 90s, I guess maybe stepping back even further, the early 80s, even the late 70s, there was a big exploration push in the Western US. A lot of that was fueled by, sort of the advent of heap leaching for gold systems. So oxide gold and the discovery of Carlin in Nevada, really fueled a lot of work initially in Nevada, but then everybody spread out from there. And by the late '80s, almost every major company had an office in Spokane or Coeur d'Alene. Many had offices in Missoula or Helena, and so this part, sort of the inland Northwest is what we would refer to it, was very active in the mid to late '80s. A number of discoveries were made. Things like stibnite, which you're probably familiar with Perpetua. That was discovered and known. It was mined in the '80s on the oxide side. Nobody wanted to go after the sulfide then, but same with Delamar, which is now Integra, Black Pine, which is Liberty. This was all discovered in the '80s. So it's really that expansion out of Nevada initially into the state. And so very active in the late '80s into the '90s. And then gold price started declining. It got pretty tough just on the economic side. And then the other difference in Idaho is a lot of the federal land is Forest Service. Forest Service in the '70s and '80s was great to work on. It was pretty straightforward permitting, largely especially in Idaho because of the state was founded on mining and timber. Timber in particular was very important for the state's development. And so with that, you have a lot of logging operations on federal lands. And the '80s were fine to work there. The '90s, it changed dramatically. And that was a function of a number of things, the main being the spotted owl being listed on the Endangered Species Act. And sort of this had impacts in the broader Northwest, Oregon, Washington, where I grew up. I grew up in a logging town. That sort of crushed the logging industry, particularly on federal ground. It became impossible to sell logging units on Forest Service, and that impacted minerals. And so that's what happened in the '90s. It was a combination of the spotted owl, just the lack of development. There was a bigger push on the environmental side as well to just sort of shut down development on forest lands. We saw the same thing on BLM, but to a lesser extent. And it shut down most of the offices, the Spokane, Coeur d'Alene, Helena offices. Those all shut down in the mid '90s. And once you shut an office, it becomes really difficult to rebuild that back up. And so going into the 2000s, gold price bottomed in 2000, 2001. Base metals, there was always, quite a bit of active work on the silver, lead, zinc side in the Silver Valley. That never really saw, a dramatic downturn, except for with some production in the '90s. But yeah, it was really the 2000s and then into the 2010s, things started to change on the forest. A number of them became more workable from a permitting standpoint, just meaning that they wanted to see development. And that's when we came in 2017 and 18 was really to address that question. The geology was obvious. Like there was clearly good big mineral systems to be found at surface. It was a question of whether you could move them forward, and we just didn't know. So we took the risk on that side. We worked with a lot of the forest offices, a lot of BLM offices, understanding which groups are supportive and which ones aren't. And we built our portfolio around that. There's no sense in finding something if you can't build a mine at the end of the day. And so, I think for now, where we sit now, it's actually amazing how much it's advanced. Most of the forest offices and the BLM offices in the state have experience with permitting now because of all the operators. And that's what you need. You need, the minerals administrators to know how to advance exploration and what actually a exploration drill rig looks like. It doesn't look like an oil drill rig. And you'd be amazed how many people don't quite understand that. So, it's changed a lot, but I think that in my experience is what caused the downturn and gave us the opportunity to come in and sort of ask the question of, is this still a place that's unworkable, or is it actually workable? And I think over 6 years, we've shown that it's quite workable. We permitted a lot of projects in that time. So.
Yeah, so it's really interesting because this is a state that has a rich mining history. But if you go to Idaho today, aside from that silver belt up in the north, and maybe one or two other towns, nobody knows anything about mining. They might know a little bit about logging, but the people alive today don't know anything about mining. And actually, we've seen that with Hercules in the town of Cambridge, and just some of the town halls they've done, and have to really explain it in a very simple, straightforward way. Like, hey, we're just drilling. We're putting 3-inch diameter holes into the earth, and we're not damaging the environment or affecting any animals. And this mine, if we're lucky, is going to get built 10 years from now. It's not going to be built tomorrow, right? So there's a lot, there's a lot of education that has to happen. And how challenging have you found that, just sort of the people who have like the wrong idea about what you're doing?
Yeah, it's a bit of a challenge. The other part of that challenge is there have been a number of juniors that have come in and overpromised and underdelivered. You sort of a lot of these small towns, they're mining districts, so there's plenty of exploration projects there, and groups have promised that, oh yeah, there'll be a mine in 2 years, and the towns get excited because a mine, there's not really anything like a mine from an economic development standpoint. Like the wealth that can provide, particularly over the long term, is pretty phenomenal. And I would say most towns actually understand that. Particularly when you get to the county commissioner type level, the local administrative level, they definitely understand that. And so there's a lot of skepticism to begin with. And so you have to be realistic, exactly like, the way you presented it with Hercules. They're doing it the right way, that you have to say that this is early stage, it's high risk, it very likely will fail, but we hope it doesn't. And if it doesn't, this could lead to something meaningful. And yeah, you just have to explain, here is the process. We're doing exploration drilling. We're drilling, small diameter holes, and we're successful. And we likely will do this for 5 years. And if we have success, then maybe we'll move to the next stage. And that seems to land pretty well with people. I think Idaho in general, particularly rural Idaho, it's a lot of straight shooters, good, honest people. And if you're honest and straight up with them, then it helps you a lot. And so there's a bit of that, that historical issues to deal with. But otherwise, depending on which town you're at, it's as so long as you're honest, it can be it's a relatively easy message to get across, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I like what you said there. As long as you're honest and straightforward and tell people exactly like it is, and what you're going to do, and keep your promises, then you can work well there. That sounds good to me. So let's talk about where we are today, because obviously, we could talk about the state of Idaho for a few hours, but I think most people are interested in Hercules and Cuddy Mountain and
Mhm.
copper in Idaho. So just digging back on the history of Idaho, when the Hercules hole was first announced October 10th, and I read some analysts and some um, names in the industry talk about it, it was talk like the first few weeks, like nobody's ever found porphyry copper in Idaho before. And the more I dug into it, I was like, well, hold on a second. They've been finding copper in this area for over 100 years. Like,
Yeah.
it's not that new, but maybe a big copper porphyry deposit could be something new, right? But there's been copper in this area north of Cambridge since the 1880s. Can you just tell us about the history of this area and copper mining, from what you know?
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's exactly right. Not a lot is new except for Hercules' discovery. And, just to frame it, that drill hole, hole 5 last year, is the best copper intersection in the state of Idaho history. So it was quite meaningful on the copper side for changing the perception of the state. And, we've been exploring for copper in Idaho since 2018. We had a big push on the gold side. We did a lot in copper as well. And again, my background is in porphyries. And so, we had our eyes pretty wide open for porphyry systems. And the state was hit pretty hard in the 60s and 70s. When the porphyry model was really defined, that was applied to Idaho by, a lot of the majors in the 70s. The oil companies got involved. And this part of Idaho, Western Idaho, was explored pretty heavily. And so, the project we picked up called Cuddy Mountain, which is next to Hercules, we staked that in 2021. That was a known porphyry copper system that was outcropping. It was drilled by Bear Creek Mining and a number of companies in the 60s and 70s. But, you have to factor in what they were looking for at the time, which, they're looking for supergene enrichment blankets. You need multi-percent copper near surface, because you could do the same exploration in Arizona and you could find that like pretty straightforward in the Laramide belt. Idaho just didn't deliver that in the 60s and 70s, so it fell off. And yeah, so there were, but as part of that, a number of districts were discovered. So, there's probably 6 known porphyry districts in the belt, which at the time we didn't really know how, I'd say, at the time that the companies working here didn't really know how it fit into the bigger picture. The 60s and 70s, we didn't really have even reliable ways to age date rocks. So it was really difficult to tie it into, is this part of the BC belt, or is this the same as Arizona and Nevada? And so that bigger context wasn't really pulled together. And so when we came in, I guess sort of stepping from the 70s, 80s, 90s, there was really nothing done on the copper side. All these districts kind of sort of sat there. And then we came in, in 2021 and staked Cuddy Mountain, which was a relatively obvious porphyry target at surface. This was not knowing what was next door at Hercules, we came in with a different idea that this potentially is the same age rocks as the BC porphyry belt, which you can, put Copper Mountain, Highland Valley, Red Chris, sort of getting up into the Golden Triangle, that same age of rocks, which is largely, late-Triassic into Jurassic age. We sort of came up with that idea, and that a lot of these porphyries have some precious metals, they have molybdenum, and there could be some potential for these co-products or byproducts, which would not have been looked for. And now that we have a lot of the data at Cuddy Mountain, wasn't assayed for in the 60s and 70s. So it was really just a changing of kind of the economic backdrop of what could be what could be a potential mine that allowed this district to sort of see a revival. And then Hercules came in, and they were looking for silver initially, but it's a good technical team there. Chris knows what he's doing on the geology side, has done a lot in porphyries in BC. And, once they had done soils and saw there was significant copper there and a nice IP anomaly, that's a good porphyry target. And, they drilled into one. It's pretty amazing that how it worked out. They took the chance and they were successful and drilled, again, the best copper hole in Idaho state history. So pretty phenomenal series of events, but it really opened the eyes of definitely the majors, the same majors we pitched Cuddy Mountain to in 2021 and 2022 that wouldn't take a flyer because, it wasn't a big porphyry belt at the time, and it's completely understandable. There wasn't anything known, but it's definitely changed the perception of Idaho and its copper potential for the better.
So, I've got your presentation. I'm not sure if it's public, but there is definitely that map, which I believe you guys actually made, if I'm not mistaken, or made.
Yeah.
Maybe you copied it from someone else, but it shows the BC porphyry belt extending into Washington and into Idaho, and then curving back towards the west, and it just tags into Cuddy Mountain. It's just like it gets to Cuddy Mountain, then it bends back to the west. There's been a ton of staking here in the last year since Hercules drilled 185 meters of 0.84% copper in hole 2305. What's your sense of what all the I mean, they're trying to find a porphyry, but what's your sense of what's happening there, and which companies are really at the top of the pack here in this area, to try to find a new copper porphyry there in Idaho?
Yeah, there's been an enormous amount of staking. I've actually not seen a staking rush like this in my career. I've been US focused, so there's certainly been other ones elsewhere, but in the US, this is by far the largest staking rush I've seen. And I mean, there's probably been, I don't even know, 5,000 claims staked, just an unbelievable amount. And yeah, I mean, a lot of that is with companies going in with the mindset of, get the ground first and think later. That's how, particularly some of the majors think about it. And that's the right way. If you don't have the land, you don't have anything. So some of that is that. A lot of the ground is, sort of outboard of the Cuddy Mountain Hercules district is covered terrain. So you're looking at post-mineral rocks. But there are a few other groups, you're familiar with, I'm sure, Nev Gold and others that have staked some of these other copper occurrences. I don't know a lot about them, to be honest, so I don't have strong educated opinions of the potential, but there's groups doing good technical work out there. And I think there'll be more to be found, certainly. There likely is more than just Cuddy and Hercules in this area. We now know Hercules is a separate porphyry center than Cuddy Mountain, very likely. It's far enough away. So we know there's a couple in the district. Usually when that's the case, there's more than a couple, especially when you have, say 100 kilometers of trend. along there. So I think the next 5 to 10 years are actually going to be quite exciting. Groups will discover new things, certainly, at surface, and we wish them all the best. It really, so long as they're operating honestly and doing it the right way with good technical work, it's good for Idaho. So it's we're sort of rooting for everyone. Again, I don't have super strong opinions on the technical merits of other projects, but I think the belt has enormous potential. Beyond just our area. We stuck to just Cuddy Mountain. We acquired the ground we thought had potential 4 years ago. We didn't do much additional staking. Staking rushes, I'm not so interested in being involved in those. So, maybe we'll see how things look in 5 years. I suspect there will be some new discoveries in that belt. It's exciting times.
Can you do your best to explain how these porphyries or this porphyry was formed 205 million years ago? I know that this was like an island arc out in the Pacific Ocean, but what happened to the Earth that caused this big crash here to form these porphyries?
Yeah, it's a great question. High level, the porphyries. So we know Cuddy Mountain is 209 million years old. It's roughly the same age as Copper Mountain in BC. So it's effectively the same geologic history as the BC porphyry belt. I'm certainly not an expert on the BC side, but as we understand these terrains and why we thought the Idaho portion of this belt was part of the BC belt was there's been enough work done in the past where we roughly knew the age, and these, as you mentioned, are accreted island arcs, which just means they were basically Indonesia or the Philippines. These are volcanic islands. They form at subduction zones. So you have, plates on the earth, one plate's going under the other. And as that happens, you get melting in the earth and it makes volcanoes. And, porphyries form in the roots of volcanoes, more or less. And so you need those island arcs or continental subduction zone volcanics to really drive these porphyry systems. And so we don't know all the details because it was a heck of a long time ago. But 250 to 150 million years ago, there were large volcanic island chains out in the Pacific. Would have been off the west coast of the continental North American craton. You can imagine it again, just like the Southwest Pacific now. And as those islands, they sit on top of these plates, and the plates are sort of like conveyor belts. They're sort of, the islands are stacked. They sit on top of the plate. They don't move, except the entire plate moves. And so the entire plate was moving eastward towards the continent. And as that happens, the plate subducts underneath the continent, and these islands are sitting on top, and they just get smashed on, one after the other. And that's really the geologic history of BC. A lot of the Western US, say actually from like Western Idaho, Central Nevada, everything mostly west of that is accreted. So these are smashed on other islands and things like that. And, when that happens, you get a lot of structural complications. The rocks get folded, they get faulted, and you end up with porphyry systems that can be quite dismembered. And so you see that the best example in BC is actually the KSM, Carat Sulfurettes Mitchell deposit, which is held by Seabridge. There's been a lot of work on that. It's roughly the same age. And that district is quite chopped up because of this accretion. But there are others that don't have significant dissection. So we're trying to understand that now. But yeah, more or less, these are porphyries that were formed in the ocean on island arcs, and then they got smashed onto the side. And this is just a part of Idaho that has a bit of that accreted terrains. As you go east in Idaho, you don't have those accreted terrains, so it's very different geology.
So you guys have been busy out in the field in 2024 at Cuddy. Tell us what you guys have been up to and what you've learned so far.
Yeah, so we, when Hercules announced the discovery last fall, it was sort of going into the latter part of the field season. We had not done a lot of work on Cuddy Mountain. We knew there was some historical data out there. We knew, again, there were good, nice porphyry vein zones sticking out of the ground at surface, but we hadn't done the baseline technical work you need to do to target drilling. And so when Hercules, announced the discovery hole, that materially changed our future on the financing side. We were able to raise quite a lot last fall privately, and it set us up to do really the right technical work to prove up the targets. And so we hit the ground initially in February. We got snowed on. We hit the ground again in April with our team, which is, we have about 8 to 10 technical people, ranging from, geologists through technicians. We do all of our own work internally. So we do all of our own soil sampling, all of our own mapping, all of our own drilling as well, which Cuddy Mountain's not to that stage. But yeah, we ended up starting in May, still got snowed on, but continued work. We went out and sampled and mapped the entire project, both on the soils and the rock side. Again, trying to understand the geochemistry at surface. There's some pretty key things you can do in porphyries to understand kind of where you are vertically and horizontally in the system or systems. And, as we got into this work, it became pretty clear that there's not just one porphyry system at Cuddy, especially as we started to get the geochemistry back. So we did about 1,300 soil samples out there. It's a lot of hard work. That's steep ground. And so, our team came in and did very quality sampling, and the data came back just exceptional, especially on, the molybdenum, copper, gold side. So I think what we've shown now pretty convincingly is that there's 3 separate porphyry centers, 2 high conviction, a third would be potentially concealed, but 2 very high conviction. One is the one we knew about at outcrop. The other is, covered under 1 meter to 2 meters of soil, it looks like, but we found some disparate outcrops. And, just on the geochemistry side, we're seeing, sort of 4 to 10x anomalous values over kilometers in the moly or molybdenum, copper, and gold side. So we see good potential for copper, gold, molybdenum, which is interesting and unique in that, Hercules doesn't have much gold. It has some silver and molybdenum. So there's a bit of a different flavor there. But yeah, it's turning out to be one of those projects that gets better the more work that you do. Most don't do that. And most that we've worked on over the last 6 years haven't done that. So that's meaningful, that the more work you do, the more compelling it gets. And, just at an objective level, looking at the data, these are phenomenal targets. And we've since done 3D IP across the entire project, ground mag, detailed work, and the targets are stacking up pretty much unlike anything I've worked on the porphyry side. So we're very fortunate that the data are coming together well.
So the soils are compelling, but the porphyry is going to be deep, or deeper. How deep do you think you're going to have to drill to sort of find, the potassic core of 1 or 2 of those? And, what's the IP showing you?
Yeah, so we actually think the porphyries are at surface. So there are 3 porphyry centers. We've named them. The original was called IXL. That was known historically. Bear Creek explored that. That's a potassic core at surface. It's tilted, so it's structurally tilted about 60 degrees to the northwest. So you can imagine these porphyries forming, they're vertical, upright. You can just take the top and tilt that 60 degrees to the northwest. We think the entire district sits like that, which is why there's still potential here. But the IXL porphyry at outcrops, there's some historic drilling there that drilled 177 meters at 0.34% copper with 40 meters at 0.8. We've since found some other drilling around there that's drilled 35 meters at over 1% in sulfide, in potassic alteration. So the porphyry center is there. The actual true depth is 150 meters. And so it's at surface, more or less. The second is called Climax, which is further to the west on our land position. That also outcrops. It looks like we're a bit shallower in the system there, actually, where the potassic zone, it does outcrop, but it's overprinted by the phyllic zone. So Hercules, most of the mineralization they've drilled to date, as far as I understand, I don't know anything about the drilling of this year, but the drilling last year, most of the grade was in the phyllic zone, which is often a bit more distal to the potassic core, which is, now, as I understand, they're searching for the potassic core. And Climax looks like it's in that phyllic zone. It's actually standing up as the most compelling target. We see both bornite and magnetite at surface at IXL and Climax. So again, like in the porphyry environment, that's really what you want to see. If you're seeing those assemblages on the mineral side, it gives you good conviction that you're in the right part of the system. We don't know until we drill it, to be honest, but everything, except for at IXL, we do know that it does outcrop with Climax. And then the third being Railroad. we don't know exactly the depth. That will take drilling, to really understand that. But at current level, the IP anomaly, the chargeability anomalies are at surface. They're very high amplitude and large, multi-kilometer scale, and they start at surface more or less. So, yeah, time will tell on the drilling side, but we're looking for near surface porphyries. These are things that if you find 0.4 to 0.6% copper would be quite interesting from a major perspective. You just need the scale. So.
When you say that the chargeability anomalies are at surface at Climax and the IXL, do you mean that there's a chargeability high at surface, or is there like a moderate chargeability that's got chargeability highs, like around it?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it sort of speaks to what do you actually drill in a porphyry on the chargeability side?
Yeah. What the hell do you drill,
Yeah.
Curtis?
Yeah, because it's geophysics. It's very easy to make pink blobs, right, that look compelling to drill. And so I would say there are two broad types of porphyries globally. It's way more complicated than that in detail, but on the chargeability side, one is the chargeability will often be in the phyllic zone, and that's because you have a lot more pyrite there. Chargeability is a function of disseminated sulfide content usually, and phyllic alteration will be high pyrite, and there's a lot of porphyries in the world that don't have much copper in the phyllic zone. So that would be sort of bucket one there. And so in that scenario, what you want to drill is actually an internal chargeability low flanked by chargeability highs. So you want to drill those shoulders or internal to it, because the potassic zone will be lower sulfide, particularly if it has bornite and magnetite. It won't be as chargeable. And so you want to drill the chargeability low. And so yeah, that would be, I would say, we'd call that an anomaly, and we see that especially at IXL, where the potassic zone outcrops. It's a charge low, and it's flanked by charge highs. Same with railroad. Now, the second type would be, I think, Hercules somewhat fits into this. Time will tell after a lot more drilling to really understand it, but they see copper mineralization in the phyllic zone, and they drilled a chargeability anomaly. That was the discovery, was drilling that. Plus, they knew there was some copper in soils, and so in that scenario, and at Cuddy Mountain, being that it's right next door, we should probably drill the chargeability highs to know. And so at Climax, we see a large chargeability zone at surface. Again, it's sort of like, we're just getting the inversions back now, but it's sort of 1.5 by 2 kilometer scale, 20 to 30 millivolt per volt, like pretty high level, looking like 4 to 5 times background, which is meaningful. And beneath that, you do see some chargeability low at, say, a couple hundred meters. We don't know if that's the depth of the survey. You're just sort of losing resolution, or that is the potassic core. That'll take a drill bit to know, but it's a long, nuanced answer that you might expect from a geologist. But we do want to drill both the charge highs and the charge lows. So time will tell what is meaningful.
The one thing I know about geos is they always want to drill. They always want to drill. So it's always like some long answer. It could be this, could be that. We just got to drill. Okay, just drill.
Yep.
You guys are all the same. No, so how do you explain that somebody drilled 35 meters of 1.23% copper in potassic and walked away from the project?
Yeah, it's a great question. Well, so I mean, that wouldn't have been that interesting it was drilled in 1964. So it just wouldn't have been that interesting at the time. They were looking for, and the things you could drill in Arizona, like in the Globe Miami districts and elsewhere. I mean, you're looking at multi-percent copper chalcocite enrichment blankets over tens of meters, near surface. And so it's just all taken in context. It wouldn't have moved the needle that much there. And actually, we didn't even know about that drilling until about a month ago. And we have done a lot of work to find the historic data. And this is one of the challenges in the US that a lot of listeners might not be aware of, but there is no filing of exploration data, even on public land. So much of this work just gets repeated. Like we have had to go to the ends of the earth to try to track down the historic drilling at Cuddy Mountain. We go out there and you see drill pads and just like, okay, there's got to be a drill hole here. And so you just try to find the old data, talk to old consultants. And, there's actually an entire business in the Western US of selling old data. Lots of people have built their name around. And so it's this challenge in the US. And we just came across some old files back in June, and we knew about the surface intercept. And it turns out these were underground holes. There's an adit that goes in to explore the higher grade portion of the surface intercept. And they drilled 6 or 7 underground holes, all with really nice, it's 1.5 meters at 5% copper and sulfide, just excellent grades. And, you sort of need that in porphyries as a higher grade core. And so we're pretty excited about the potential of that. That will obviously be where we start drilling. We know that that's, a good chance of drilling something meaningful there. And those are, grades of interest there. It's pretty wild actually how some of these things come together as you just sort of unravel the different layers of exploration work. And sometimes you're fortunate and find there's some good drilling you didn't know about.
I know that, Hercules is a shareholder of Scout. I know you're friends with Chris, and I'm shareholders of both, so I want both you to win. But I'm going to ask you for a forward-looking statement. Do you think you can top 185 meters of 0.84% at Cuddy?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, I don't want to guarantee that. I think we can, but it's a function of the drill bit, right? We don't know what we're going to hit, so I can't say that with any confidence. I do have good confidence we can drill. I mean, just as an example, the historic hole drilled in 1964, the surface hole, 177 meters at 0.34% copper. They didn't assay for molybdenum or gold. That's just copper. There's molybdenite at surface, and we've sampled 0.5 gram gold at surface there. So we know there's gold in the porphyry veining that was drilled as part of the intercept. So from a copper equivalent standpoint, that's probably more like 0.45 to 0.5, somewhere in there, which gets very interesting. And then again, there's a 40-meter zone at 0.8 there. It needs to be thicker and better than that, but that's a really nice place to start. There's 3,700 meters of historic drilling, all in very shallow holes across a couple different areas on the property. So it's effectively untested from a porphyry standpoint. And we already know there's good mineralization there. So, time will tell what we can show with the drill bit, but from a targeting standpoint and from a, what is known, it's teed up about as good as it can get in the US on the porphyry side.
If somebody has a question for Curtis, we'll probably go for another 15 minutes. We'll probably take one question from anyone who wants to ask Curtis a question about Scout or Cuddy. Curtis, what's your understanding of, like, in the 60s, like when they went into that adit and drilled that hole, why didn't they go deeper, and why would they stop the hole in grade? Like, it just, some things don't make sense. Was it a technology thing? Did they run out of money? What do you know about that?
Yeah, it's all speculation. I honestly don't know, and I don't know any people who are involved in that. Probably they're, on the drilling side, drilling was a lot different in the 60s on the coring side. So they would have been depth limited. You're not drilling 2,000-foot holes out there. That would have been an extreme endeavor to get that done in the 60s out there. So there's sort of that factor. They may have lost the hole. We don't know the details on that. As well, like with copper, you can visually tell. You don't often need assays. You can visually estimate copper based on chalcopyrite or bornite, with good confidence. And they just probably knew they were not seeing the grades and thicknesses they needed to see for the 60s, which you would have needed to see, 100 to 200 meters of 1% to 2% copper, probably with a very near surface enrichment blanket. And they just didn't see that. And so it wasn't that meaningful. And what we learned in June actually is that the adit that's there, which is called the IXL adit, was put in as an exploration drift in the 60s to explore that higher grade portion. So they actually put that adit in to drill those holes. And, we don't know anything past that. We know that they moved on from the project, would have been 1966 or 67. And, it sat dormant since then. There hasn't been a single hole in that area since then. So a few other oil companies drilled a few holes around it, drilled some decent grade, between 0.1 and 0.5 copper over pretty good intervals, but, all shallow and at surface. So I don't have a great answer, to be honest. It's sort of probably lost to history as to why they stopped. But boy, in today's context, that's an extremely interesting intercept. Those grades, again, being in sulfide and being relatively near surface in a porphyry environment with potassic alteration, that's super compelling.
Yeah, you're telling me. It's got me really excited. I'm gonna have to go out to Idaho again soon.
Yeah, absolutely.
I got two more questions for you, and then we'll wrap up. Because honestly, we could go on for hours about this. It's super interesting. It's probably my favorite topic here in 2024. I try to avoid politics and all that stuff, so I try to think about the rocks in Idaho instead to
Yeah.
keep me distracted. I'm sure you saw the news from Hercules yesterday, and they put out two really interesting maps,
Mhm.
and some of it is a little bit over my head, but the faulting, it seems to me, just from a logical standpoint, is a lot of this has to do with the faulting that's going on here. And that there's this one fault that they show called Tom's fault. And I'm just kind of interested in your take on that. And does that run over into your property as well?
Yeah. So, short answer is we don't know. The longer answer is, I don't have strong, educated opinions on the geology at Hercules because I haven't spent a lot of time there personally. So, I think it would be. I'm not the right person to ask about that, to be honest. I will say that I think, number one, I think the Hercules team, like what I read in the news release yesterday, I think they're doing the right work. Like they're doing the work that needs to be done to discover what may be there. And the reality is these are old porphyry systems, and they're going to be structurally complicated. We don't know in which ways, and it's the challenge of exploring these. Like it takes a lot of drilling, and the drilling is tough at Hercules. I mean, it is really challenging ground there, and they have great drillers. We know the drill company out there. They're local to Idaho, and they know what they're doing. But it's just really tough drilling conditions. Yeah, likely a function of the structure and the structural complications. But I think what sort of struck me and the sort of last fall, the initial drilling was actually how relatively cohesive a lot of the porphyry mineralization is. It wasn't as chopped up as we would have expected based on the age and the smashing of an island onto the side of a continent. And there are certainly going to be faults, and they've found some now. They probably will find more, but as of now, seeing good thicknesses of grade like they saw last year, that's pretty meaningful. I think it suggests that it's not enormously dissected, because you can imagine a scenario where it's so faulted up that you can't actually piece together a potential ore body. It doesn't look like that's the case. It looks like it is, intact enough, but you're going to encounter faults of different orientations. And it's the challenge with drilling. It's effectively a covered target. They're drilling through younger age rocks. And so you can't really use anything at the surface to educate yourself on what orientation to drill. So you just have to learn with a drill bit. And it's a tough way to learn, but I think they're doing all the right things, moving it forward, and they're getting better on the drilling side. The company is out there, and in terms of orientations to drill holes, but that's all just part of the process with drilling these off.
All right. And then final question, the Forest Service. So the Forest Service, in the U.S. is different in various states. And I just want to get your take on how is it to work with them there in Idaho?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the Forest Service can be the difference between the BLM and the Forest Service. Everybody's familiar with the BLM, and that it's a good place to work. It's only different on the early stage side. So when you're doing the first pass exploration work, so BLM has what's called a notice of intent, which gives you 5 acres to explore. You get that permit in 30 days, almost always. On the Forest Service side, you don't have that. You have what's called a categorical exclusion, which takes a bit longer. And so that's where a lot of the sort of the reputation of the forest of being slower has come from. It's just the difference in the permitting. But the reality of the forest is that each district, and so in Idaho, there's at least 7 different forest ranger districts. They all operate relatively independently, whereas the BLM operates sort of all the same. There are some differences between offices, but in Idaho in particular, and I'm not an expert in other states on forest. I do know in Nevada and Arizona, there's some really challenging forests to work on. But in Idaho, we specifically focus on certain forests, ones that The local area is supportive of development. I would say Cambridge next to Hercules and Cuddy Mountain is supportive, broadly. And the Payette National Forest, which is there, is supportive of development as well. There's a fair bit of logging ongoing that supports much of the counties around there. And so you sort of need that backdrop. As an example, you don't want to go to Sun Valley in Idaho and work on the Forest Service there because that's not their mandate. There's going to be a lot of local opposition that's going to influence the forest. But the advantage of Forest Service is so long as you're honest and doing it right, and you build a good relationship with the local community and the minerals administrators and the district ranger, they have a lot of flexibility to work with you. It's less stringent. And so, we've had some good conversations. I mean, I was just down in McCall last week meeting with the Payette National Forest. They want to do things the right way, and so do we. So I think we're all well aligned on that. They're happy with how things are moving forward with some of the other operators out there. And yeah, it seems to be a backdrop that can be supportive for mineral development. It's, these things are always moving targets as, political regimes change in the US and, new people come into different offices. And, but as of now, it seems to be a place that is supportive of us all sort of moving this district forward together.
All right. I actually have another question.
Yeah, no, I've got plenty of time. So
okay. Yeah. So you guys have some money in the treasury now, but I know you want to do a pretty big program at Cuddy, and you have a few other projects that want to work as well. How much money do you need for that? And when are you going to go public? You have plans to go public?
Yeah, so I mean, I have to be a little cautious on sort of what I can talk about regarding that. We're a U.S. company, and so we're private. Our intention is to go public on a U.S. primary exchange in the near term. So we're moving towards that. There's sort of a lot of details around why we structured the company that way, but it's yeah, we're fully funded through the year. We own 2 drill rigs internally, and so we're drilling aggressively on the gold side of our portfolio, which most people don't know. We have a significant gold portfolio. Cuddy Mountain's kind of the main event right now, certainly, but we have historical resource. We drilled some really nice holes on the gold side last year, and so we're following that work up now. We're doing the hard work on the gold side, while not many people care too much about gold junior equities right now. It's similar to when we came into Idaho in 2018. Nobody cared about it. That was the opportunity. And so we're doing the hard work on the gold side now for when, gold price has been moving quite aggressively. There will come a time where these results matter, I think, from a equity standpoint. And so we're doing a lot of work there while we're working up Cuddy Mountain. So we aim to drill it next year. We do own some private lands actually at Cuddy Mountain. So we may, we're sort of contemplating maybe a first pass program earlier than that, but we're targeting drilling it next year, and we'd like to drill it when we're public is the idea.
How much private land do you have at Cuddy?
Yeah, so we own 3 patented mining claims. It's 52 acres private land, so quite a bit of ground to work. We can drill the railroad target well from that. We can't test the main IXL and Climax porphyry centers from it, but we can. There's some upside there. It certainly looks like there's another system to explore. So we're talking at the board level if it makes sense to do a program there. It may make sense to just do it all next year though. So time will tell there.
That's interesting. Okay, I learned something today. So 10,000 meters is planned though in the first phase of drilling at Cuddy.
Yeah, so 10,000 meters is about the bare minimum. I mean, the scale is hard to convey of what needs to be done out there. Like it's from a copper moly soil rock anomaly, we're looking at about 2.5 by 4.5 kilometers, relatively consistent. That would encompass the 2 main porphyry centers there. And so anything less than 10,000 meters, like you're not even scratching the surface. We need to drill 500 to 1,000 meter holes to really test it. And we have that capability with our rigs internally. So we aim to do that. And, it's just, that's only 10 holes if we're drilling kilometer holes. So it's, it doesn't get you very far. So that's at a base level what we're moving towards now.
And what's the total size of the property, at Cuddy?
Yeah, it's roughly 3,000 acres, I would say, all in. Yeah, about 140 mining claims, unpatented mining claims, and then the 52 acres of private land there.
I see. Okay.
Mhm.
You had no real interest, in expanding that.
No, not really, to be honest. Yeah, there's certainly an argument to be made. We could have gone off and explored other districts. I try really hard to not um, chase trends in some ways. So there were a couple groups that were staking, relatively early, and so we were confident that Cuddy Mountain, it looked like we had staked all the known mineralization there at surface. So we were happy with that land position. I looked at a number of the other districts over the last 6 years, and there wasn't anything that I had looked at. And this is just sort of historic data. There's certainly more to be found, but nothing that looked more compelling than Cuddy Mountain to me. So we sort of stuck with what we knew, and again tried not to outstake some of the majors that were out there. They have bigger budgets than we do, and that wasn't a game that we were really interested in playing. So
Makes sense. Yeah, it's hard to compete with Barrick in terms of the kind of capital that they can just throw at just staking.
oh yeah.
So okay, very good, great conversation, Curtis. So basically, the thesis is 3 potential porphyry centers at Cuddy Mountain. A lot of evidence at surface. The theory will be tested in 2025. Is that a good place that we can leave the conversation?
It's a great way to sum it up. That's exactly right. Yep.
All right. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Great first conversation with Curtis Johnson of Scout Discoveries. Until next time. Cheers, everybody.
All right. Thanks. Appreciate it.